Today the topic is the awakened mind as a dynamic whole body state, and mainly we will be listening to Peter talking about body-mind connection and sharing with us the old devices that people like me have never seen and hopefully show us some sessions and how to use biodots.
My name's Peter Staples. Let me see, I knew Max right back in the time when he was doing the courses, and I lived with Isabel after Max died for 29 years. She died in August, unfortunately. And we used to do classes together for quite a period of that, and we also designed and made our own instruments. So I've got a good understanding of where Max is coming from, and it's probably unlike any of the things that the rest of you have experienced in biofeedback. Max's approach, you see, was that of an engineer and a scientist, as well as being a meditator and a clinical psychologist, medically trained. So there's always this idea of testing your work. And if you like, the basis of the biofeedback is that you've got an objectivity which allows you to zone in very quickly on the way someone's responding. Which, if you like, is a kind of engineer's perspective. And that's going to be, what I'm going to do today really is talk you through where Max was coming from, in particular what he meant by this term awakened mind. We glibly talk about awakened mind state, but there was a lot of research went into that idea, if you like, and the model that you could represent aspects of that on the instruments. Okay, there's a little synopsis of some of what we'll be doing in the next 2 hours. There's one thing I would like to just check before I say any more. How many of you have actually heard of Max's book and heard of anything about the awakened mind state?
I have, of course.
Yeah.
Craig wants to say something.
I just raised my hand to say yes. I've got Max's book.
Oh, brilliant! Yes.
Yeah, how do we raise our hand?
Who else? Robin.
Yes.
Yes. Oh, good.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Okay. That helps quite a bit. So there's kind of 3 themes, if you like, that I'm going to run through this. One is, if you like, this perspective on training of awareness and responsiveness. So Max's approach basically is that if you want choice, then you need to have awareness. So if in some way the way you live is going to change in the way you would want it to change, then it will rely on you having awareness of the kind of things that are causing the problems. So if you like, it's very much geared around self-awareness. Although these are things you can help people with, it's really something that's rooted in the individual. It's kind of like no matter what you learn in the context of a training session or a psychotherapy session, when you go outside into the big wide world, it's basically you're there and there's all these things happening. And it's really a matter of how well you're able to recognize what's happening, in particular the way your responses are being determined by what's going on around you. So if you like, that's the theme. And the awakened mind is really about a state of mind of increased awareness, both of what's going on externally through the senses and what's coming to you internally, if you like, through impressions from within the brain. That's the first one. Then the second one is it's to do with the nature of relaxation. I'll explain a little where Max was coming from, but Max would swear that you can have a deeply state in the nervous system and be sharply alert and aware. And if you like, that is the nature of the state we're describing. So if somebody says, I'm going to chill out, you see, now that's a strange thing to say, because it kind of implies relaxation, but the chilling implies a kind of lethargy. It's kind of like things are turning off. So that's not really the aspect of the state we're talking about. And when we get on to looking at the peripheral temperature and the autonomic nervous system through the galvanic response, you'll see how this distinction manifests. That's the second one. Then the third thing is, again, we talk of brain states. I know everybody loves the mind mirror, the EEGs, all the flashing bars, but we're talking about whole body state. I'm going to say a lot more about this. The mood you're in is only determined to a moderate extent by the neurology. The rest of it is by the chemical makeup of the bloodstream. So things change in your body, your mood changes, and you hang on to it. So it's like something happens to someone, and maybe they get angry, and the stimulus goes, but the anger doesn't go. So how come that? Something has changed in the body which causes that to retain in that state for some time. And that's what's happening, is the chemical makeup in the bloodstream has changed, and that takes some time to dissipate. So in a way, it makes no sense to think of awakened mind as being a brain state. It's a whole body state. That's the third of the themes. Okay, let me say a little bit about myself. When I was at university, I was introduced to transcendental meditation. This was in the 70s. And I practiced that for some years. And then around about 1980 or so, somebody gave me a copy of Max's book, The Awakened Mind, which I found really interesting. But what was apparent was that you couldn't go very far without experiencing it. So next thing, I was in London at the time. I went along to Audio, who were the company, Geoffrey Blundell's company, who made the first ESR that used this type of measurement, the omega-1. And that's where Isabel used to work. She used to go there on Mondays and Fridays to help sort out the biofeedback. But Audio, I'll say, was a high-tech radio microphone company. That was their business. So things like stage mics, concert mics with no cable. That was what they did. But Geoffrey Blundell had met Max in the earlier days, and he'd realized how useful it would be if he were to put together a range of instruments and be able to manufacture them to support that kind of work. So that's really where the tie-up between Geoffrey Blundell and Audio and Max's work came from. Anyway, having got the ESR, what soon became apparent is that there was a limit to what I could actually get from it without more instruction. It's not something many people can learn from a book. It's kind of like you need to have somebody who knows what's going on and can monitor what you're doing there to give you the feedback. That's my experience anyway. So I went along to the classes, and at that time, Max and Isabel, Max was kind of doing this pretty much full-time by then. There was a sort of twist to his background. He'd worked, originally he was trained as, well, in medicine and clinical psychology, but he also moved into instrumentation. And his speciality was spectroscopy. And in the 60s, he was developing an instrument for prevention of, or early detection of breast cancer. It's called the Pyroscan. This is one of the big companies in the UK. And he was offered a job to jointly run a project in the States. And the idea was to scan pretty much all the females within a certain age range as a preventative measure for breast cancer. And a dynamic project right in his field. However, at that time, it was part of the Nixon era, and there was a quota on green cards. And so although this place was there and there was an office there with his name on the door, he couldn't actually go. And so for quite a few months, they basically, Izzy and Max had sold up the house and were sort of in limbo. And in that time, he got into developing the biofeedback much more. And when the opportunity came to go to the States, he said, no, I'm going to stay here and develop the biofeedback. And that really was the era where the mind mirror came into fruition. I think it was probably because he was able to devote the time and energy to it that project could come about. Anyway, they used to run classes. At one time there was a college in Camden in London, and that's where Anna Wise worked. That's where she met Max. She worked at the Franklin School, but it was closed down because I guess it wasn't part of the state-run education system. And Max continued with the classes in the homes of friends around there. And by the time I knew him, they had the use of a sort of converted basement, which was set up with tables with biofeedback instruments that would take about a dozen people. And he would do, say, a basic class on Monday afternoon, another one on Monday evening. He would do a secondary class on Wednesday. There'll be another group on Tuesday evening. There'd be another group on Thursday evening. So these would be groups of about a dozen or so. And then he would also do classes on the weekends. So, you know, busy time. And that was the kind of the basis on which this work was done. So originally he was really using the that kind of classroom framework as a basis for research, and particularly looking into the way that relaxation would have, I guess he was trained as a clinical hypnotist amongst other things, and he was interested in the extent to which hypnosis could be successful because of the relaxation, the degree of relaxation the client was in, and the extent to which it was down to the nature of the suggestion. And really the early research with the skin resistance was kind of coming from there. And the conclusion he came from was it was the relaxation was the most important part. And that was done by monitoring quite substantial numbers of people using these instruments in that kind of classroom situation. Now, if you're familiar with Awakened Mind, it may not be that apparent, but the first part of the book is really geared around research into relaxation based on the autonomic nervous system, so through skin resistance. And then once the mind mirror became available, it opened the door for much more research. And the rest of the book is more geared around mind mirror, brain rhythm, correlations, and where it went with healers and the swamis and all this kind of stuff. Anyway, just coming back to a little bit on what I was saying about myself. Well, after Max died, there was still a demand for the classes, and I got together with Isabel, and we would run them together for quite some time. And what you'd find is that people, there were not people who were, you know, enthusiasts or in the field. They're just basically people who've come along because they're interested. And we'd had one group called, we'd offer a service called the mobile unit. And the idea was if you had a group of people, you could book us for a day, maybe a Saturday, and we would go along and run the class there. They probably thought it would be a converted Pantechnicon or something like that with a classroom in the back. In fact, it was a Volkswagen with a couple of crates of instruments. And so they would set a room up, and we would lay out all the instruments. So what we would be using then would be typically, say, for everybody an ESR meter, skin resistance meter, and a peripheral temperature, and we'd have about 3 mind mirrors. And they would probably all get an opportunity within that day to get on the mind mirrors. But it's all in the format of group training. So it's like the exercise is given by the group leader, myself or Isabel, say, and the other one can, you know, assist with the instruments and keep an eye on what's happening. But it's not really a one-to-one basis for training, although both Max and Isabel did do that separately from the classes. Okay, now it's I'm wary of running a seminar about something which is essentially experiential without it having an experiential element. And this is why we talked about the biodots. Has anyone got one, by the way? Put your hand up and wave if you have. Oh, yeah, right, okay. So this is a rather sophisticated biofeedback gadget. I'll stick one on my finger there. So it's a black dot, and, well, it starts off black, and it changes color according to temperature. So it'll go first a yellowy color, and then more into green, and then blues as it warms up, and at the top of the scale there's purple. So what that's doing is indicating how well the blood supply is flowing to the periphery. So if you think about it, within the body there's a kind of core blood temperature which is kept somewhere around 98.4, and if you have a fever maybe that goes up, but normally it's kept within that range, and then the periphery is used for helping to maintain that temperature. So if it gets hot, then you'll maybe sweat and cool from the periphery, and if it gets cold, then you try and reduce heat loss from the periphery in that way. But of course that's being managed by the hypothalamus, and the hypothalamus is strongly connected to the pituitary gland, which secretes all kind of neurotransmitters and neuropeptides all around the body. So it's a real control center. So we're talking now limbic brain. So what we're actually looking at is a response from the limbic brain, different part to the skin resistance. And the hypothalamus is also responsible for kind of sleep states and waking states, how awake or asleep the body is. So when we want to identify a relaxation which has got an alertness, a liveliness to it, then we're looking for the hand staying warm. And the great thing about the peripheral temperature is that for relaxation, warm is good. So if the fingers are warming up, you're doing the right thing. If they're going cold, then something's missing. So it's kind of really easy. It's about as easy as, say, the trouser belt is for telling whether you're putting on weight. It's not much scope for arguing. But that aside, just get a sense, without actually touching your hands, are your hands warm? So how are you going to do that? They may be or they may not be. Do they feel generally warmer than, or do you sense that they are generally warmer than they might be? Or cooler? Okay, now try touching, say, your cheek with your hand. So when you do that, does that feel warm or does it feel cold?
Cold.
Cold. That's a good test then. So your fingers are going colder.
Same.
What colour is yours?
I don't know.
Don't know.
It's blue. Blue.
Oh, well, that sounds
Blue.
good.
Yeah. No, it's I'm warming up. It was colder.
Yeah. If you want to know the colour range, if you press on it a bit, you'll find, or even breathe on it.
Comes with a card.
It does indeed.
Yeah, comes with a card.
So during the next hour and a half, how are we going to know whether the body's switching off? And one way of telling is, well, are your hands staying warm? There used to be a saying, this went right back to Alice and Elmer Green, where it's users of temperature as a measure. Why do biofeedback practitioners go around with their hands in their pockets? Yeah, well, why? It's because if they shake hands and their hands are cold, it looks like they don't know what they're teaching. In fact, how much can you tell from someone just by touching them? When you shake hands with someone, if you think about it, there's a whole load going on, because the warmth, when you talk about warmth of hand, you might think, well, this is somebody kind of, outgoing and empathetic, they're warm and all that. But it's kind of what it's really telling you is that they've got good peripheral blood flow at that point, which again probably means there's plenty of energy there, and it probably means that their mind is reasonably alert and aware. Okay, we're going to come back to that one. Oh, and the other thing, of course, is if you're running classes or groups, these are fantastic because you can give them out and they cost practically nothing. And people will zone into what's happening to themselves much better than listening to what's happening to someone else. It's much more convincing if it's personal than if you're just watching someone else. I'll tell you something a bit funny actually. Once we used to do a festival sometimes, and if you had a stand, you're often asked to, if you want to give a presentation. And Geoffrey Blundell had one at one of the, I think it was the Alternative Medicine exhibition in London, and Izzy and I were doing a seminar there, and it was described as with instruments. And about an hour before, I went along and said, well, how many people have you got? And the lady doing the ticket said, well, we've done 90 so far. And I said, well, you've got to stop because we've only got 90 instruments. And there we went along, and they're all sitting there full of, and we got together every ESR and every temperature meter we could find anywhere, and we managed to get about 90 together. So we gave them out and told them how to put them on. He said, if you've got one that looks like this, that's an ESR, you put that on that way. And if you've got one that looks like that, you've got temperature, and it goes on like that. And then we did some exercises and explained things. And then halfway through, we said, right, find someone who's sitting near you who's got the other one and swap over, and then you can see how you're doing. And of course, what you want is for it to make an impact. And it will make much more impact if it's personal. If something's happening to someone and they can recognize it, then it will have much more impact than just being told about it. Okay, now, I'm going to say a little bit about Max's background as well. Max's father had been in the army. He was born in 1918, just after towards the end of the First World War. And his father had been in the army and around quite a bit, and he had quite an exposure to Sufi traditions of meditation, I guess. And what he would do is give Max exercises to get him aware, I guess. You know, maybe you're walking along and you count as you walk, and you maybe count on the in-breath, and then you count a bit and you count on the out-breath. And it means, you know, that's your mind isn't drifting off somewhere else. Or the other one is like where you've got a whole load of objects laid out on a table, you put a cloth over, you don't see them, someone else has done it, and they take it off, and then for maybe 1 minute, and then cover them up, and you have to recount what's there. And again, it means instead of just seeing something, you've got to relate to it. You know, you've got to, in effect, put some of your energy into that process in order to be able to retain it clearly. Anyway, he also he went to school and with one or two Japanese children, and he was introduced to Judo and Zen Buddhism through one of those at an organization called the Budokai in London. So that meant before he'd even gone to college, he had quite an exposure to techniques and application, not just sitting there, also, for instance, in Judo. And then, so when he went to medical college, all this stuff was poo-pooed. And it was only later on, when he had a background in medical instrumentation, that he realized that it should be possible to find some objectivity to a change in state using the instruments. So the basic idea is, if there's something changing in your mind, then there should be a change in the physiology. I mean, the mind is rooted in the body. It doesn't make sense to say your mind changes and your brain or something doesn't change. And then if you can find a way of measuring it, then you can provide feedback of what's happening. And that was kind of the basis for all of Max's biofeedback. And what he was looking to do was to find correlation between X states he was already familiar with. So he already knew about meditation, and he knew about active involvement, relaxed and alert in action, and he knew about Zen states. The thing with the Zen states, this is from Zen Buddhism, is particularly they're geared around awareness, moment-to-moment awareness through the senses. And so he was coming from a standpoint of understanding the states, and then trying to find ways of getting a correlation of what's going on using the instruments. Obviously, that's not an option for most people, but that's where some of this mapping of internal states, which you see, say, in the awakened mind, comes from. Okay, let me see. Are you all familiar? You probably are to some extent. In the Awakened Mind book, there's a chart called something like the electrical brainwave pattern correlations of internal higher states, and it shows at the bottom end is like a deep sleep, and it shows a pattern like you would see on the mind mirror display, which is just delta, nothing else. And then dreaming sleep, which is basically a theta and nothing else. And then the next one is called waking sleep. Now this is a sort of strange term for the Western world, because what he's kind of saying is that's the state most people are in most of the time. And it's called sleep because it's like your attention is being captured and directed by your state. So typically, quite early in life, you learn a whole load of responses relating to the culture and I guess the way the people around you live and what they expect. And that becomes more or less an automated way of responding. So the way you respond is basically related to the way other people are doing it around you, and they tend to be a very restricted range of ways you go about doing things. And in particular, you'll tend to find there is a kind of chatter, a sort of left brain dialogue running all the time, which is tying the brain down into a particular state. And if you like, that is the kind of stumbling block when it comes to learning change and learning new responses, is this whole kind of almost trance-like nature of what's essentially an ordinary waking state. Anyway, the next one up, so that's the third one. The fourth one is called meditation, and that state shows up as a balanced left brain, right brain with alpha and theta, but not much beta. And you can see from that it's essentially a state that's internalized. So by meditation, it really means and kind of not engaged really with the external world much. And that is a quite different state from the state 3, the waking awareness one. Partly because it's more internalized, but also it's kind of like this, the way the attention is being dragged by this, and this internal chatter has gone. So that you're left with a much more of a calmness and a much greater connection, if you like. Part of the problem with the noise, you see, is like all this chatter is clogging up all the channels. In the neurology, it means there isn't the space of being aware of subtle changes because there's just other stuff going on all the time. Okay, then what you call the state 5, or the fifth state, is what happens when you try and bring the qualities of that meditative state into the big wide world, if you like. So it's no longer internalized, it's a mixture of internal awareness and external direction. So you could say in some ways it's a little bit like what happens when you pull aspects of this beta state together with aspects of an alpha theta state and bring them together. I think that's probably not a good way of looking at it. A better way of looking at it really is if you can keep this kind of connection and calmness from the meditative state and bring that to bear when your attention's being directed through the senses and you're having to function and work in the world, if you like, then you can still maintain this element of connectedness and detachment, if you like, but use it more purposefully. Now on the chart, there's actually 2 levels to this state 5. Max had called the first one lucid awareness, and they both share the same kind of brain pattern. This will be a rounded, contained sort of beta, and then the alpha coming out, and theta and possibly delta coming and going. And that's kind of what you're typically going to see in a session when someone manages to produce this state. So it's kind of, you're seeing all the elements there, but it's not reached the point where it's rooted in the individual. And then the second of these, which he called awakened mind, is really when it kind of becomes part of you. And if you like, it's something which isn't transient, and in particular which you can keep this kind of state under stress and with your eyes open and doing things. And it's kind of a bit awkward, this one, in a way, because I was saying with Judith when we were talking about this, that the state 5A, the awakened mind state, is really kind of like a lifetime learning. It's like you take what you've learned of these responses, and then you've got to kind of become part of that. And it's a big, if you like, it's a big thing. And so what we're talking about really is aspects of this which somebody can learn, and then hopefully they will integrate into more of who they are when they have to go out and use it. Okay. I think that's probably about enough on this bit. Let me, while I'm here, I want to just give the opportunity to show you some of these. I don't think they're legacy equipment. I call them first generation and second generation equipment. Now, what I'm hoping is I can get them in front of the webcam so you can see them. So the first one, so the original ESRs, Max made out of little card file boxes using old meters from kind of army surplus and bits and bobs with a soldering iron. But once Geoffrey Blundell saw them, he said, oh, well, I can do better than that. And he produced the Omega 1. So, okay, let me see this. Everyone see that? So basically there's a handpiece which straps onto the palm, and then the meter has got an on-off switch, and you can have what's called a basal value. So basal value gives you, say, an absolute reading. So I'm somewhere down here at the moment. Or you can adjust the knob to get a relative reading. So, for example, if we were in a group and we wanted to see how people responded to an exercise, we'd get them to center the needle at the start, and then the change they made would be a response, quite separate from where they are. So this machine is kind of, it was the first one, firstly to have a measurement from the palm, which is a bit more stable, albeit more complex probe to make than the fingertip. But it's doing the same kind of thing as the GSR on the Velistus. Now, this one, this is a sort of equivalent, it's temperature meter, so it's got a temperature probe, a thermistor there. You attach the thermistor, say, to a fingertip, usually just with tape or Velcro. And then the, where are we? Turn it on. And again, I can adjust the relative value to bring it into the middle of the scale if I wish. Or I can look at what's more like an absolute value, a basal value. So it'll take a little bit for this to come up. So at the moment, this is in centigrade. All the UK stuff's in centigrade. At the moment, it's reading 32. Take a little moment to warm up. So again, this is the one which would be used in the classroom along with the Omega 1. That one's called the audio temperature meter. Now, this one is the mind mirror. Where are we? So this is the one you'll see, say, in the book. There's no, there would be a contact set, not that dissimilar from the Velistus one. It's not quite the same, but there's basically two pairs of electrode and an earth one. Feeds into here, and then these are the equivalent of the bars, you'll see on the ballistas display. So these are red LEDs which are lit up all the time. So I'm just getting a sort of artifact by touching it. And then, of course, there's no way on this machine to record things. It doesn't have a computer on it, but you can freeze. So this freeze button allows us to, if somebody's doing something we particularly want to draw their attention to, maybe they have their eyes closed, you can freeze it and then show them what they were doing afterwards. This machine does actually have a way of recording. Jeffrey put an interface where you can plug a cassette player into the side, and it basically just records it as an unprocessed signal, and then there's a playback button. When you play it back, it will play it back into the mind mirror as though it was the signal coming off your head. In fact, it's even got an interface of the filtered channels, which I think was developed for looking at the transcendental meditation stuff. So so the Mind Mirror 1, the original Mind Mirror, looked roughly like that. That one's the Mind Mirror 2. There were a few changes just on the way the filters work that came out of experience, really. So Anna used to she bought a lot of these ones back in the 80s. And so I'm sure there are quite a few of them still going around in the States. Now, these came along. So the Mind Mirror 1 came around in 1976, and this Mind Mirror 2 was not that much later. But by the end of the 80s, it had become impractical for audio to keep making these in machines. So the cost of the Mind Mirror constructing the thing got so expensive, it wasn't really realistic to do that anymore. So 2 new machines, replacements, were brought out by a company called Biomonitors, which was Jeffrey and his nephew, Neil Hancock. So this was what replaced that. This is the Mind Mirror 3. So this machine, it's essentially kind of self-contained, but let me see if I can get it to come on. But it just has a small display. So on this machine, it uses the same contact set. It feeds in and it displays the bars on the display here, and it's got a freeze button. But there's also an output through an optic fiber modem, so you can connect that to a computer, and then you use the big computer screen like you do on the ballistas, and you can record sessions and look at the signals and all that kind of stuff and print them. So the difference between this kind of technology and the ballistas is that the frequency analysis is done within the box, and what comes out is just a feed of the process signal to the computer. And in fact, if you don't mind the small scale, you can run it as a self-contained unit. But so although this is analyzed in software rather than in hardware, like in the Mind Mirror 2, it's basically does the same thing. And then the other one they brought out was this baby. This is called the ET meter, Biomonitors as well. So this relates to what we're going to do in a minute. So there's the same kind of square as on the Mind Mirror, and there's a signal for ESR and a signal for temperature. So there's a newer version of the palm electrode, so that fits on the palm for ESR, and there's a temperature probe which fits on the finger, and then when you turn it on, I don't know how well you can see this, but there's a vertical bar and a horizontal bar. So now, instead of being a needle on the scale, the skin resistance is a vertical line, and I can vary the offset, so I can, there's a bit of reflection on that bit, so I can center the needle that way. And the temperature is a horizontal bar. That's kind of natural. If you think of an old style mercury thermometer, hot is at the top, cools down the bottom, so it's kind of like that. And I can vary this. But the thing about this scale is that it's not just about whether it moves to the left or the right. There's also 4 states. So there's a correlation between the change in skin resistance and temperature. So what we're finding is, for example, if the ESR moves over this way, that could be, say, flight and fight, could be panic, but it could also be an involvement. So maybe there's high arousal because you're doing something, probably not something you get so much in a classroom where you tend to be sitting there, but you can still see that. And you might see it, say, in insight. So somebody, there's some kind of emotional block released, and suddenly there's a surge of energy and the peripheral temperature goes up. And it's not the same as the panic state. And then on the other side, when we're coming down, the skin resistance on the other side, we're saying on there, that could be relaxed and alert, or it could be going dozy. And so the difference will be determined by the temperature. So if the peripheral temperature is staying up, we're saying, well, we've got a relaxed and alert state. This is the one we're after, really, awakened mind. And if you're really just going off to sleep, again, hypothalamus sort of checking in and saying, oh, we've done enough of this, we're going to turn everything off, then you'll find the responsiveness will go. Somebody won't have the same, you know, that's like if you get dozy when you're driving a car, it's just kind of really dangerous. It's not a good state to be in if you've got to be doing things. I wouldn't say there aren't benefits from relaxation. I mean, you've still got the skin resistance coming over this way and activity going down, but it's not the state that which you can take into the battlefield, if you like. It's no good if when you're, say, driving a car and a traffic jam, people cut you up. It's no good if you flip between, say, panic and drowsy. That's not going to do anyone any good. So you need to basically be able to keep this relaxed and alert state and then move it over to involvement when you need to. So really we're saying with the awakened mind, we're looking at the peripheral temperature up and movement between relaxed and alert and active involvement. So say the difference between these two could be you're going on stage and there's a big crowd, and are you kind of centered and on top of it, or do you get stage fright? So the stage fright would be the panic. This is typically you're starting to move into flight and fight, blood move away from the periphery, your fingers will go cold and you might go white and coming over here, so high nervous arousal and peripheral temperature falling. Or if you're on top of it and you're saying centered, and with, I'm sure it will be an alpha state, your sense of connection with the people around you, then you'll stay up in this active involvement. And if you like detached, that's the thing, you can be involved but detached from the emotional responses in a way that you won't be in this flight and fight panic state. So a more labile state. Anyway, so this gadget, oh, and also there's actual temperature up here. Again, it's centigrade on here. So this gadget was conceived completely by Geoffrey Blundell and brought out as a replacement to the ESR and the skin resistance. But by having a single display, what it allows us to do is interpret in a much more right brain way what these shifts actually mean. So instead of looking at numbers and just, oh, it's going that way or that way, we're actually moving into these different emotional responses as we see directly on the meter. The relevance of this today is that when Steve connects, he's going to show you that on the new Ballistus. Would you believe it? I guess, is Steve here yet? Stephen!
Hi.
How are you?
Very well.
We just, this very moment, come onto this 4-quadrant display, and I was demonstrating Geoffrey Blundell's ET meter in the scale, and how fortunate we are to have you here today with us to show us through what's going to be on a new Ballistus before long. I hope.
Okay. I don't have anything to show you just at the moment. Should explain that. How far have you got with explaining the quadrant, Peter?
Well, I just have this very minute.
Okay, right. So, essentially, what we're doing with Ballistus is creating what we're calling emotional stress meter, which uses, excuse me, on the vertical axis, it will be the temperature, and on the horizontal axis, it'll be the GSR. And we use the same 4 quadrants, which I think Peter has explained already. And basically, it works exactly the same way, except that we use the Ballistus sensors that you currently have.
Wonderful.
If that makes sense.
Do you know when it might be around?
I am hoping in a couple of days' time.
Oh, wow.
We're very close to having it finished. It's just, it isn't finished yet. As always with development, it always takes slightly longer than you would expect, or I would expect, even with 40 years' experience in this.
You're still an optimist.
Oh, yes, one has to be with software.
All right. Well, thank you, Stephen. That's probably as far as we can go with that one.
Okay.
Now, what I want to do next is, if we can, is to get Blake on the instruments, and just if he's here.
He is here. Let's see if you can see him. Let me get this scrolled over correctly.
So what we need to
Okay, there
see
he
is the display.
And then I'm going to share screens with you. His biodot's on a blue.
Oh, wow.
So
And
he's, where'd you start, Blake, with your biodot? What color?
Went from black to blue.
He went from black to blue.
Brilliant.
So this is in centigrade. The skin temperature is in centigrade.
So
You can see everything now?
It looks a bit high for centigrade.
Yeah, it does. Take it off, Blaker, and
That's about 150 degrees Fahrenheit.
yeah, I thought that might be kind of high. We've had it off and on, so let's let it drop.
Yeah. So to put it in context, your core temperature will be about 37 centigrade. So that's equivalent of our 98.4, say. So I would expect readings maybe 30 degrees or something like that. So room temperature, I'm guessing, is probably at your end somewhere around about 20 centigrade.
Okay. All right.
Anyway, so
all right, so he's going to reattach it.
That looks better.
that looks quite.
It's gone a bit high. Well, 35.
Well, it's possible. Yeah. Blake, do your hands feel really warm?
Yeah.
Yeah, they are. It probably is then. So what we'll have to do is, without the wonderful new display, I'm going to look at the numbers. So on our Lesh display, we've got a numeric value. So it's showing somewhere around about 1.2 on the GSR, and on the temperature, somewhere around 35.5.
Which is 95 degrees Fahrenheit.
So if I say that's our starting point, then what I'm interested in is responses relative to that. Now, what I'm going to, so oh, it's jumped up again. Oh well. What I'm going to suppose is that, Blake, did you see the 4 quadrants we talked about? Do you know what we're talking about?
The 4 quadrants, did you see them that he just showed with the meter going?
Yeah.
Yeah, he did.
Do you have that sheet with you, Judith, anywhere around where you are?
Yes, I do. I have the one that you sent.
That's it, yeah.
This guy here?
Yeah. So if you look at that, that's it's roughly what we're talking about. So what I'm going to, the object here, let's say, is to get Blake familiar with these 4 quadrants. So there's no value judgment about this is good, this is bad. What I would like is to have for him to get a sense of I'm moving up into active involvement, or I'm moving into lethargic and drowsy. And that doesn't have to be a big change, you see. It's kind of like, well, it's like, suppose you're driving through a city and you get lost somewhere, and it takes you ages to work out what's happening. And then next time you go through, all you need is to know what you need to do at the point just before you got lost. So it's kind of like it's highlighting what's going to happen just as you go into that kind of response. It's not how far you've gone that way.
I think you're making Blake nervous. I see some high beta coming up here.
Well, yeah, but you see, this Lesh one, I would... So I'm expecting that to say push a response into more like this panic, flight, fight kind of thing. But he's not very phased, is he? Now, Blake, what's something which would really phase you?
Probably loud noises.
Do you ever get phased?
Yeah, I'm startled pretty easily.
Okay, so you saw a little bit of it there. So all the beta came out when Blake was recalling, albeit in a rather detached way. However, what I didn't see is any change whatever on the leash or the skin temperature. So what I'm kind of seeing is a state of pretty much detachment from enacting out, if you like, feeling what we're talking about in the body. And that kind of makes sense in a way if you look at the brain rhythms. You know, there's alpha and theta there all the time. And the sense I get is that Blake's okay with this. He's fairly centered with it. Okay, now how's this one? Are you any good at arithmetic, Blake?
Pretty terrible, actually.
Oh, good, good. What is the? Do you know what a square root is? A number times something else equals a square.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. What's the square root of 145? No, quicker than that. Come on.
Yeah, I don't know.
You cheat.
Good
That's
answer.
no answer. That's no answer. All right. When
12, maybe.
yeah. No, it's going. But you see, hardly any movement on the leash or the temperature. So this is still pretty centered. All this. Okay. When
Steve, can I bring up a numeric blood heart rate while this is going?
Sure.
I could, couldn't I?
Yeah.
So let's that could be an interesting thing to look at. All right. But you might see change in heart rate that you wouldn't in hands.
Yeah. I'm surprised the temperature isn't changing a bit. It's a pretty sensitive scale, that one. But still.
Let's see if it changes for me. Yeah, it does change for me, so it's working.
What I suggest for now is let's have a look at the brainwaves, shall we? Because
Okay.
that's moving around nicely. The others, I mean, if the others don't show much movement, then it's difficult to demonstrate much in this sort of context.
Okay.
So what do we make of the brain pattern? So on Max's correlates, you know, brain states 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What are we looking at? Well, of course, what you notice is that it quite often doesn't look quite like any of them. It's kind of got bits of them. So one way of looking at it is, well, what bits have we got? And they're neatly colored in here. So the delta's down the bottom. Now, what's going on there?
We can take this gamma off if you want to talk in Max terms. That's more your...
Yeah.
And then he doesn't have his eyes closed. That's going to give him a ton more alpha.
No, it doesn't matter. Yeah, let's just look at the delta. Blake, when you look at the house where you live from the road, how many windows do you see? Okay, so there's a delta going out. So there's that. The answer to that question is not immediately to hand. It involves searching, and that's what you're seeing with that response coming out on the delta.
It's fascinating.
Nice.
It's 1, I think.
What? One window, right? Well, that's good, you see, yeah. And we always just say with dowsing, if you don't see something coming out on the delta, then I'd be suspicious. You know, it'll quite likely be subconscious. If you like, the idea of the dowsing rods is to bring something that's below consciousness into the external. And if you see like the pendulum move or the rods cross and you're not seeing any delta, again, I'd be rather wary of whether you're actually going to get anything out of that. Okay, so this is, just close your eyes for a moment then, Blake. Just. So this is sort of fairly classic, really. Rounded beta at the top, the alpha kind of up the scale a bit, but fairly stable and pretty symmetric, the patterns too. Let me try again, Blake, on what's the square root of 193? Is the answer in the left brain or the right brain? That's a good question.
Fairly sure I
The
have no
left
idea.
brain. Yeah, but you're looking in the left brain.
Ask
I
him a
mean-
non-square root question. He's really smart.
How do you spell rhododendron?
RHODO. Nope, that's wrong. Wait, yeah, DENDRON.
R-O-N. See, that's good, and you see you kept that state through all of that. So it's kind of like something like that. You've got to think, well, where are you going to find the answer? And anything resembling closing off it is not going to help. You know, if you like, what this is really about is connecting your intention to where the answer is going to lie. And I think one way of looking at all this, but particularly the brain rhythm, is that it's not so much the state, it's about the connection. In a way, a state might be not the most helpful term. It's really about linking things. So somewhere there lies the answer, and can you make a connection to it? And I think that in a way that sometimes needs a bit of kind of faith or confidence that if you set the thing in motion, it comes. This is rather like when people say you can sleep on it and you know, the next day you come up with the answer, or you're struggling to think of something or remember something, and then it just comes. And it's like what you've done is to start establishing the process of connection. And in a way, it's almost like there's no limit where that can take you. You know, if you like, the constraints on our awareness are largely just blocks to connections. And there'll be a whole load of cultural blocks based on language and, you know, the way we habitually respond and this kind of thing. And that as you become more aware to subtleties of nuance, then you find there are other things you can connect to which wouldn't have been there before.
Ask him a philosophical question, or a psychological question, or even a literary question.
Okay, Blake, is it reasonable to say God exists?
Based on anecdotal proof, I suppose so.
Suppose so.
A nice philosophical answer.
You suppose so, yeah. Okay. What's something you really like?
Music.
Okay, what kind of music?
It's a complex answer.
Oh, come on.
Rap music.
So what I'm looking for is Blake working in the left hemisphere more or the right? Often one of them's leading, and that's where you might find it. But of course, the problem with music is that, especially something like rap, it could be in either one quite easily. It could be a left brain thing or a right brain thing. What's your favorite rap tune?
Road tune? I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Yeah, what's your favorite rap tune song?
Probably New York by Angel Hayes.
So that starts with a left lead, if you particularly in the bottom half, the delta and theta. So that's kind of like where Blake's gone to look for an answer. But then when you find a bit after that, it flips out more into the right brain, and particularly in the alpha, and you think this is where it's, my senses, this is where it registers, oh yes, this is the right answer, something like that. This is my favorite one. It's like you couldn't answer that in the left brain. You'd need to somehow get some of it at least into the right brain.
What about, where do you enjoy, or Blake is really great at arranging things. He's a wonderful writer, and he loves to arrange things visually, like in his room and in the house. And I wonder where he experiences all of that aesthetic arranging.
Ask something more specific, Judo.
Yeah, like if I gave Blake a room and a bunch of elements to place in the room, and some of them that were spiritually, like Om signs or chakra symbols and beautiful materials and furniture and clothing especially, what would it be like, Blake, then to encounter that room and start the process of arranging things very beautifully?
Just me.
That's a good one, Judith. So this needs working on. So we're seeing all sorts, bits of left delta coming out. And there's not a simple answer. So there's another problem as to how you're going to formulate the answer. Now something's come up. So it's coming, you can see it in alpha. So before long there'll be something which could be an answer. What have you got, Blake?
I guess I need clarification on the question. I'm not really sure what you're asking.
Just imagine yourself having a room full of exquisitely beautiful materials, textures, and objects to arrange. And how would that make you feel? And then how would you go about it? How would you work it out as a finished, until you reach a finished product?
Just comes to me. I don't know. I don't have a method.
It just comes to you.
I just arrange things until they fit.
Mm-hmm. What's it feel like as you're in that flow, that stream of arranging things?
It's very sensationally satisfying.
Very sensationally satisfying?
Yeah, it's blissful to make things harmonious.
The reason I'm waiting is because an answer like that may not be a conclusion. I just kind of want to see what else comes along, really. Mm-hmm. But I think that's probably about it for that question.
I'm not quite sure. It's not a very clear question.
Yeah, well, that's part of it, yeah.
I did see his delta start to upturn, and I did see a little bit more theta coming in there, as if it were a feeling thing.
Yeah, but there's no problem with a vague question. It's just going to elicit different responses to a clearer question.
Okay, I'm out of the questioning business. Back to you.
All right. Well, okay. What you're seeing here basically is what Max called state 5 pattern, more or less totally. Although it jumps around this and that, you know, the delta comes out, and what you're seeing all the time is a fair element of alpha, a fairly balanced pattern. There's theta present all the time, and the beta at the top is pretty contained. There's not many people who could do that just like that, with everyone watching them and with their eyes open. So I saw this on the webinar I did before with Blake on there, and I was really impressed. You know, what I'm thinking is, how well can that situations beyond this room, if you like, this space, and in particular, I'm kind of interested in how it manifests through expression. So this is a fairly cerebral session that we're doing, and I think that's something that'll probably change when Blake gets a bit older, is that there'll be more choice for the extent to which that expresses through the autonomic nervous system, especially with people watching like this.
Wait, what are you saying there, Peter? Are you saying he's going to get more stressed or less stressed?
No, I think he'll have more flexibility on expressing, for example, through gesture and more emotive elements. I would say the situation's pretty daunting at the moment anyway, so. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's interesting to watch the blood volume pulse, how easily you can make it jump by saying the word daunting. It jumped to 80 where it's been hanging down at the low 7, and there it goes again. Yeah, so a tender vittle, but not so much on the GSR.
Yeah, but it comes down though, doesn't it? It very soon comes back again. That's the impressive thing.
Why don't you ask him just to relax and see if you could get a big difference in everything? What was the relaxation format or regimen that Max would use to just make a quick test on relaxation?
Well, different people probably respond different ways. Okay, Blake, sense feet flat on the floor, okay? And breathing easily down at the diaphragm.
Sorry.
Okay, so breathing easy down at the diaphragm, eyes closed. Get a sense of connection of your attention with a point down at your belly. And with each out breath, let go a little more. Relax the lips, relax the tongue, the throat. And a sense of calmness pervades. Just keep your attention, your connection of your mind with that point on the belly for 30 seconds. I'll count you. Okay, bring your awareness back to the room. Deep breath to come back. Actually, deep breath kind of brings the blood volume pulse right up. But I don't see much on the GSR really. It's stayed really.
No, and we saw this with Blake before. We saw that he typically has extremely cold hands. And I think, Steve, you told me that it's not just dry hands that can affect a GSR reading, but also cold hands, right?
Yep. Well, I mean, cold hands kind of imply that there's very little peripheral blood flow.
Yeah, so I think we can't trust the skin temperature, but the Lesh state for him, it was really high last time. In fact, we did a meditation and it only dropped to 2 or 3, whereas his brain waves were clearly state 5, as even Peter pointed out. So he is able to drop that Lesh, but but he's got very cold extremities all the time. In fact, his idea of life is to graduate high school in 3 months and move down to, I don't know, Cancun or something.
Close to the equator as possible.
They're as close to the equator as possible. Yeah.
Do you, Blake, do your hands feel cold at the moment if you put them on your cheek? Do they
Yeah.
feel cold? Yeah. Okay, I think, should we round this bit up then now, Judith? And big thank you, Blake, for your wonderful brain patterns.
Thank you too.
What I want to say now really is a bit about what's going on in the brain and the neurology when we do this. There was a kind of almost classical view that everything was done through neurology. It's all electrical signals passing down the neurons, and that's the way things work. And that's not quite right. So if you have a sense of what a neuron's like, so it's basically there's loads of points, dendrites, where inputs, could be 1,000 of them, feed into the neuron, and then there's a nucleus, and then there's a long strand, if you like, the axon, which is where the output takes place. So when the neuron fires, an electrical signal, in fact, change in potential passes along the axon. But when it gets to the end, it doesn't connect to the next neuron. There's a gap, and that's what the synapse is. So when you talk about a synaptic gap, what you mean is the input from one nerve is not actually connected to the output of another nerve. There's a gap between them, and they all exist within a fluid, a sort of interstitial fluid. And what happens is there are chemicals called neurotransmitters which will leave the tips of the neuron that's firing, and they pass across the fluid, and then they connect to the next neuron. That's the way the charge passes along the chain. And so between, say, the sense and the brain, there might be half a dozen of these synaptic connections. And of course, there's millions of them in the brain. Now, the thing about the receptor is that there isn't just one of them. So the neurotransmitter is the chemical which leaves the neuron, but it can only hook up to the right kind of receptor on the next neuron. And there might be lots of different receptors, and it must match. It's like a key to a door. So a particular neurotransmitter, this is a chemical we're talking about, something like, for example, dopamine, serotonin, they're examples of neurotransmitters. They can only connect to the next neuron at a receptor site, a neuroreceptor site of the same type. So the next neuron along might be getting all kinds of different inputs, different neurotransmitters coming from either the fluid or direct close to connections, still running across this interstitial fluid, and it needs enough of those before it will fire. And so if there's, say, more than one type of neuroreceptor being fired, then a decision's being made. And in fact, some of them can block the neuron firing rather than cause it to fire. And so what happens in the postsynaptic neuron is largely determined by the nature of the neurotransmitters coming across. So if you look at, say, what's happening in the galvanic skin response, you're actually looking at a collection of ions being released across the synaptic gap, collecting by the electrodes. And so when there are more of those, it means there's more electrical activity, then you're finding you're getting, in effect, a lower resistance. But other things can affect that. It may be that there's loads of neurotransmitters already around in the fluid, and they're not just ones that have been released by the neighborhood neurons. And it may be that the flow of fluid, as Stephen was just describing, if that will also be a factor on how much this is going to affect the skin resistance. But that's only part of the story. the receptor sites also respond to other things. So they'll respond to, say, steroids, they'll respond to neuropeptides and hormones. And these are essentially different chemicals of increasing complexity. So a neurotransmitter chemical is a few amino acids, in effect, chained together. And a neuropeptide is a longer chain, a bigger molecule. Now, as well as affecting whether the second neuron is going to fire, the neuropeptides would also amplify or reduce the signal. So when a transmitter connects to a receptor, it's called binding. What that means is it chemically attaches, and then the charge or other things, chemical aspects, can transfer from one to the other. And a lot of this field was kind of opened up in the late 90s, and it's described by Candace Pert in a book, Molecules of Emotion. Candace worked in the field of trying to identify what was causing some of these responses, and particularly the way some chemicals seem to have such an inordinate and unpredicted effect. And she researched this, and the book basically is partly biographical, but it also gives an account of what was going on in that field at that time. So one of the kind of problems with this was, how does something like heroin give somebody a shot? So a chemical comes from outside the body, and it somehow triggers the internal reward systems in a big way. And what's happening is the heroin is binding to the neuroreceptors and causing the neurons on that side of the synapse to fire. And it's selective, of course. It's just binding to the ones for this particular opiate type of receptor. So it won't bind with the other ones. And how can that be? And it makes no sense if there's like a key that just takes an opiate, and an opiate is a substance that's come from outside. How did that neuroreceptor ever develop in the first place? And the answer must be, there must be internal chemicals which can do the same thing. And that's what the endorphins are. That's, if you like, a reward mechanism whereby peptides are released in the brain, can travel around the body via the circulation, and then fire selective sites which have got an opiate neuroreceptor. One of the things, when the neuroreceptors cross the synaptic gap, what happens typically is they'll bind temporarily, the charge passes, and then they're released, and either they get swept up or else get soaked back into the issuing neuron and then recycled, a bit like you catch a cab or something and he drops you off and he goes back and gets someone else. And there are chemicals which can bind and not release, blockers, if you like, a neuro blocker. And there's a treatment sometimes you get in hospitals. If somebody comes in and they're in a coma and they don't know whether it's heroin induced, is they can inject a blocker, and if that's what happens, it will basically bind to all the opiate receptors, and the heroin will suddenly have nowhere to go. It won't be able to fire the cells anymore, and pretty much instantaneously the person will come out of the coma, because the process that was causing it has suddenly been blocked by an inert chemical blocker. If nothing happens, then you know the coma is not a drug-induced one. But what it shows is how immediately the action of the connections are on the synapses. Now, the neuropeptides are all produced in the brain. So there's a whole load, for instance, come from the pituitary gland, which is controlled largely by the hypothalamus that we've been talking about. And what they provide is a messenger system, if you like, whereby a signal can be sent under control of the brain, and it will circulate around the body to the points where there's appropriate receptors. So this is what I was saying before about how your mood can be can retain after a stimulus. What's happened is the brain has released neuropeptides which are triggering or accentuating the signals in particular nerves, and those are remaining in the bloodstream for some time. So it's like the status quo has all been shifted, and while they're still there, then that's your emotional chemistry, if you like, has shifted. And there's loads of different ones. I mean, it's quite possible that for each different basic emotion, there's a different neuropeptide and a different set of receptor cells in different places within the body, which are triggered when that's released. Now, the other thing which can happen is that the neuropeptides can actually change the chemistry of the receptor neurons in a permanent way. So by continued application, in effect, what they're doing is changing the makeup to make the cell more or less likely to fire against certain neurotransmitters. So it's kind of like the process has changed the cell so that it's going to fire preferentially in some situations and not fire in other situations because of what's happened beforehand. Part of the thing about this, you see, is that your sensory input is all going through synapses. So if you imagine in your hands, there's a sensitivity on the skin. Well, that will typically, a neuron axon can be quite long. It can be several feet long. So from your fingertip, that axon would typically go all the way to the spinal cord before it's first synapse. So at that synapse, whether that stimulus is going to be processed up to the brain is going to depend quite a bit on what's happening in the chemistry of that synaptic junction. So it's like if the brain has primed the site to be more sensitive, then you'll have more awareness, if you like, of what you're touching. And if it doesn't, then it'll go on, but it just won't come into your awareness. You can tell that's not just about the brain. You see, if you when you talk about a knee-jerk reaction, you know, the medic taps your knee and then your foot jumps out. So what's happening there is a sensory neuron, say, which is firing, and the axon runs all the way up to the spinal cord, and then the motor response goes from the spinal cord back down to the muscle. So there's not a lot of synapses in that, but say, so the first synapse of the incoming one is going to be the joint at the spinal cord, and the axon will be, 2 or 3 feet long for that transition. But it doesn't go through the brain. You see, that response is basically determined by the synaptic connections on those neurons. It's got nothing to do with what the brain's doing at that time, but it will depend on the chemical makeup of the fluid in those areas, in particular the responsiveness of the receptors on those synapses. And the same is going to be true for all your senses. Like with the nose, there'll only be a single synaptic junction between the sense in the nose and the point where it goes into the brain from the peripheral nervous system. And so, how come sometimes you can be incredibly sensitive to smells, and other times, your mind just isn't there, and it may just be no more than at some point your circulation is rich in the peptides which are going to accentuate that connection, and other times they're not. But these are all things you can learn to control. If you like, when you talk about controlling your mood, what you're really doing is talking about control of the release of neuropeptides, because that's going to affect the way all the rest of the neurology is going to respond to things. And when you get, for example, you hear stories of the yogis who can sit on the freezing mountain with wet sheets all night and, the steam comes off them. I mean, what's actually happening there? What they're doing is adjusting the makeup of the way the nerves are going to be firing via release of neuropeptides. That's kind of the process. But what it shows you is that that's all possible. Within the makeup of a human being, those kind of things are possible. All right, it's not something we'd normally be doing, but it's within the framework of what's possible. And likewise, when you're, for example, keeping an equanimity in the face of stress, what you're really doing is maintaining a balance of the chemicals. It could be hormonal as well, which hormones are not very different from the other ones. And that's what's keeping the status quo. And what you'll find then is that as you become more sensitive to all manner of inputs, sensory inputs, and also, if you like, internal things that like strike you when you see the delta on the EEG pattern. It's like that's showing you something's happening. But what determines the extent to which you're going to respond to that will be largely what's happening at the point where the signals are crossing the synaptic junctions. So that really is the kind of area in which you're learning to change responses. And it's a whole body thing. So it's not just what's going on in the brain, it's about the whole, if you like, the timbre or mode or tone of the body and the brain, of course, too. So same true in the brain. You know, again, millions of synaptic junctions which are going to be influenced by the makeup of the chemicals at the synaptic junctions. One example, for example, is the beta blockers. So what a beta blocker is controlling the uptake of adrenaline or noradrenaline, and by in effect blocking the receptors, it means a higher concentration of those chemicals, neuropeptides or hormones in the blood supply, is not going to produce the normal effect. In effect, you've put in a barrier to stop that happening by blocking the neuroreceptors that would be responding to those chemicals. But of course, you don't need to be taking a drug to do that. It's just that's a way in which medication can help trying to maintain a status quo when something's gone out of kilter. Okay, I think probably enough about all this. Coming back to awakened mind, we're talking, it's kind of like an aliveness and a tone. You know, when you talk about a tone of you know, say a violin or something like that, a slack string doesn't give you any note. There's a responsiveness. It's like if you tap it, it bounces back. And if you like, the whole brain and neurology exists within a kind of tone, and it is within our ability potentially to learn how to. I mean, we know to some extent how to change that anyway. I mean, when you change your mood by choice, that's what you're doing. It's just the scope of it is probably way beyond what most people would appreciate until they become more sensitive. And if you like, value the ability to make that kind of choice. So I'm saying what we're looking for with the awakened mind is this a kind of vibrancy and vitality. And that's one reason why we need to be able to get the nervous system to respond when the brain's looking at things and choosing what to do, if you like. What you saw with Blake, you see, in effect was a kind of dissociation from the neck down. Izzy used to call it journalist syndrome. And you'd find people would show wonderful brain patterns, but it wouldn't be manifest in the body. And particularly, probably, you wouldn't find those people are probably overly expressive with their hands and emotions and this kind of thing. And I've heard one guy, he said, well, you know, when I realized what you're talking about, I realized I'd like been living through plate glass. Is that I'm on one side, like in a tank, and everything else is on the other side. And I can see it and I can relate to it, but I'm not connected. I'm not kind of part of it. And I guess it's difficult to sort of, I'm not trying to sort of preach on this. What I'm trying to do is explain what Max was on about when he was talking about responsive and alert. And for example, the difference between movement in the autonomic nervous system from a relaxed and connected mind and what's typically happening in more like a lethargic or fixed state. yeah, like on the bottom half of this scale. So on the top part, you know, although we're relating that to blood flow to the periphery, I mean, really, we're talking more like the quality of a tone or vitality, and the ability to be actual respond quickly. I mean, one example of this, I'm sure everybody's seen the Dalai Lama now and again, maybe at a Glastonbury Pop Festival or something like that. And what you're seeing is somebody who's centered and calm, but that he's totally attentive, and he'll respond in a very expressive way. And it's kind of that sort of quality. There's an aliveness there, but it's not like he's being stressed out by it. And in a way, that kind of epitomizes, I think, both this kind of state, but also, you know, if you like, the kind of culture where it's more appreciated and recognized, more normal, should we say. Okay, I think I've said enough, Judith. How are we doing? Should we open any questions? Would that be an idea?
I really enjoyed your presentation, Peter. It was great. I think that you've hit on it in terms of connecting the brain and the body. I mean, that's the whole point, the mind to the body. I mean, you can talk about all of Western culture as being a disembodied brain. We live in our heads. That's our problem. In the East, they're integrated. They're holistic. They're integrated. And that's, I think, what Max Cade was trying to get to. That's why he combined the body and the brain. He didn't just want awakened mind states. That's great. But unless you connect it to the body and we ground to the earth on which we live, what good is it? We're a bunch of disembodied heads. And we saw a nice example of that. And that's why I'm interested in this technology, because I do believe it is critical, especially at this point in our history, to actually integrate mind and body. And the other thing is that autonomic nervous system is basically being controlled by the brainstem and the midbrain, which is why you're not aware of your body most of the time, and you're living in your head with the monkey brain, which is the cortex. And instead of it being a down-up system, you want it a top-down system. You want us to be able to use, and part of the problem is, from an evolutionary standpoint, the neocortex is very, very new. So you want that to be integrated with the rest of the brain and it to be a top-down control. We're actually using prefrontal and frontal cortex, executive control, to regulate the rest of our body and to make decisions on a more balanced basis instead of this reflexive fight or flight response that we get from our body when we're stressed out. And that's not being integrated with the cortex. That's part of the problem. And everything about Candace Pert's work, the whole point was that the neurotransmitters in our brain and the hormones in our body are exactly the same substances. It's simply a matter of whether it has crossed the blood-brain barrier or not. So that's all an integrated chemical process. You can't separate them.
Thank you. Very eloquently put.
I'm really excited too. Steve is on the verge of getting this emotional state indicator. It's going to be what, Steve, like software feature, or is it, how's it going to work? People have to buy a temp sensor, or I think there was some, at some point there was some talk about making the two one.
That's to be decided. At the moment, you would need a separate temperature sensor and GSR.
Okay, and so when someone's wearing those, then we're going to see, is it going to be the same kind of thing that Peter showed us, where the two lines, they're going to move like on
Actually,
the
there's dots that kind of move around, so it shows you a trace of where you've come from. So it shows you the last 12 positions, if you like, of the line. So if you're moving from sort of an equilibrium into panic, it goes down to the bottom right-hand quadrant, and there'll be a path down into that, or vice versa.
Wonderful.
But Steve, don't you think the time delay is off?
The data look wrong to me.
You know, it's not supposed to look like that, right?
No, absolutely not.
All right.
I had a somewhat off-topic, obscure question from a while back in Peter's thing. You were talking about how neurotransmitters are more or less sensitive to certain chemicals like opioids. And I was wondering what function an SSRI would have in that process.
Okay, serotonin's a selective reuptake blocker. It's you know, an antidepressant. It is one of the newer classes of antidepressants, and you know, there you're going to get an interaction with. You know, the whole idea is to increase the amount of serotonin in the brain. That's how they work. Now, you're asking about its interaction with opiates?
No.
What would the effect of the brainwaves be? Like,
Yeah.
do
How
you
would that affect the brainwaves?
Well, there's a lot of information about how the different drugs affect the brainwaves. And SSRIs, depending on their different categories of SSRIs and different categories of antidepressants, and they tend to make beta spindling. So you'll see a lot of excess beta spindling, which is why sometimes antidepressants for certain issues are going to create problems, because some people already have agitation in their system, and you'll just create more beta spindling. So you have to match up the antidepressant for the brainwave pattern so that you get the right one for the right person. Also, the other thing that's interesting, Blake, about antidepressants is the newer research shows that the work on the actual cells, the neuronal cells in the system, are just a small portion of what's really going on. And that the newer information on the glial cells suggests that antidepressants are just a very effective anti-inflammatory for the brain, and calms down a lot of the excess activity in the brain, which causes swelling. Just like when you have an injury and you have swelling come to the area, a lot of people who are depressed actually have swelling in their brain.
So it's like taking an ibuprofen, except on extreme.
Your brain.
Wow, that's fascinating. Thank you.
Yep. Yeah. It in terms of sleep, it's a REM blocker. You know, that's how the SSRIs work on sleep. They suppress REM sleep, and the reason for that is that that's its mechanism. But this is a non-specific mechanism across all classes of the antidepressants. The more effective they are, the better they block REM sleep. The reason is REM sleep is abnormal. There's too much of it. It comes in too early. You have too much dreaming going on, and so it actually blocks it. This is also one of the reasons alcohol is the only drug known to completely block REM sleep in humans. And that may explain why a lot of folks who have alcohol problems actually are using it to treat their mood, to try and self-treat the depression with the alcohol. Of course, you pay a price for that. When you're taken off the alcohol, it rebounds, and it does so with a vengeance. And that's part of the problem when you come off some of these antidepressants. Your REM sleep rebounds, and that's a tough withdrawal process to go through. So, you know, there are the pros and the cons. The beta activity is very interesting because that's also non-specific. The extra beta spindling is a non-specific response that we see on many drugs, and we see that through the sleep as well.
It's fascinating.
So,
you know, it's really the precision and accuracy of the mind mirror brainwave pattern never ceases to amaze me. I had a guy one time who had done a lot of meditation and typically went to this Monroe Institute trainings and everything. And I had hooked him up maybe 10 times before, and he had these gorgeous awakened mind patterns with high amplitude theta, and he was always pulling up intuitive information and just great sessions. And one day he came in and I saw this ordinary consciousness pattern with almost no alpha, this really high amplitude beta, no alpha, no theta, and big delta. And this went on about, I guess, about 15-20 minutes into the meditation. And afterwards I said, well, these were really different patterns for you. Do you know what that could be about? He says, oh, yeah, I've had sinus problems, but I took contact.
wow.
I mean,
you have that kind of...
stole his pattern. raised him
That's
up,
amazing.
stimulated him up into high beta and stole his alpha even with his eyes closed.
So with the mind mirror, you can really see the drug effects, you're saying?
Oh, absolutely.
Concrete differences.
Concrete difference.
Wow.
Absolutely.
All right.
Yeah.
That's what I'm interested in.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I had no idea. We've never really talked about any of this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And another question about that point I asked about earlier for Peter. Is there something inherently different about a person who, you know, is prescribed antidepressants, and could you see that in the brainwaves, or has that been investigated?
I'll tell you where you see it, is that they can't get their skin resistance moving. It gets stuck down the bottom of the scale and won't move.
Mm-hmm.
Typical, sort of Valium effect. So what it's doing is just forcing their nervous system to work down the bottom of the scale for their own good, supposedly. But not the best way of going about it, really. Be better if they could learn how to get it down there more.
So it's depressing?
Yeah, absolutely. That's what it's doing. It's depressing.
Yes.
Yeah. And you won't feel alive in the same way because you're not expressing it. You can't. It's
maybe not depressing, but suppressing.
Yeah.
Just
suppressing it. Yeah.
So Blake, I want to know what you were interested in looking at in terms of the EEG and the different types of medications, but it's really fine-tuned these days. And there's a lot of places where you can get that if you're interested by looking at the raw EEG and looking at what medication a person's on. Some people can look at the raw EEG and see what medications a person is on predicted pretty well.
That's interesting.
You can certainly.
Yeah, he's fascinated by that.
Yeah.
Having a lot of teenage friends, may I say, who are going through various sorts of dramas, it's made him very interested in psychology and how the brain-body interface works and stuff like that.
And why some people turn to rather than others, and if there's some kind of manifestation of that in the brainwaves, would be my question.
Yes,
yeah, he wants to research that. People in different aberrant pharmaceutically induced or otherwise states of consciousness.
Right.
There's tons of space for research, and I really go back to saying that with these integrated instruments, I really look forward to the temp sensor. I mean, that's a piece, Peter, that you brought forth from Max's time that we totally lost with Awakened Mind training. We had no idea, and so many times we see people go into really deep subconscious meditation with high amplitude theta and high amplitude delta, and then their alpha will flare, you know, every now and then, and then they'll tell you later on, and you don't know if they're asleep or not, right? Because the alpha's flaring. The presence of the alpha means there's the potential for information to be coming up to beta via that alpha bridge, but and sometimes people will be like this, you know, and you're thinking, you know, I don't want to interrupt them. I don't know if they're sleeping. Of course, I could prod them. Anna told us how to handle this whole thing. But in cases, you really don't want to pull them out of the meditation. And many times I've had not interrupted the meditation and let people go ahead and meditate and said, so what was your experience? And they come back and say, oh, I heard everything. I was having the most amazing insights. And I just felt like I was in this field of light, and I'm going, oh, good thing I didn't, you know, wake them up. But the only way we're going to know if they're in deep subconscious meditation or if they're dead asleep is going to be this GSR temp sensor, this new thing Steve's developing. So I'm extremely, it's a game changer for Awakened Mind training. It really is.
Can I just add one thing? It's a bit of a tangent. One of Max's early gadgets was, he called it the hypnagogostat. It's a little box with a battery and a little alarm and a button on a spring. So when you turn it on, the alarm goes unless you hold the button down. So you're sitting through a guided meditation, and every now and again you hear one of these going off. It means they've flipped into this sort of theta delta area. The alpha's gone, wakes them up. See?
Oh, wow.
So the idea is it gets you just aware of that point where you're just slipping into that, and then pulls you back.
I read that, and I wish he had done more with that. You know that in light sleep, stage 2, which we consider true sleep, people will swear to you that they had heard you come down the hall. So there's some sort of processing going on. And so, you know, I don't know, Judith, that person might have been asleep, not really meditating, but could have been stage 2 sleep.
Well, you know, this brings us back to the big question, a central question in awakened mind training is, what is unconscious?
Exactly.
When you're in deep, dreamless, restorative sleep, you're able to have, as the yogis do, to send awareness out and understand what's going on in the outside world and then bring it back up when they're dug up from their cave. They're not unconscious, you know.
Yeah.
So these are just interesting terms that we use, but I think there is no unconscious. Maybe, you know, when people are not awake and aware, and as Peter used the word, vividly, what was the word, Peter? You said not just active, but thriving in their awareness. And so I think in the end, if people are having insights, and if they're coming back from a meditative state, there is no unconscious. But at the same time, what Max and Anna both taught is that the goal of this work is to make what was unconscious conscious, to know and understand what was not known and understood before. And so that does mean going down into the unconscious and literally uniting awareness on all levels so that we're aware of what we're not ordinarily unaware of. But I think in the end, the fact that we've got this unconscious mind connected to all parts of us and the field and sleeping and everything, aliveness, Peter, that was your word, aliveness. Yeah.
But what you're talking about, Judith, you see again, is about connection. And on the one hand, we're talking about states and awareness, but really what you're describing is a connection. It's like, can you find that connection?
Yeah. Integration. Integration, yes.
Well, but also it's like, if the answer is there somewhere, can you make the link to get it? And there's, if you like, there's almost no limit inherently to that. I mean, there might be some biological limits to the neurology we have, but in principle, the limits are ones which have been put there to maintain coherence, this kind of thing, so that you can make sense of the world around you by filtering out lots of other stuff. Most things are being filtered out all the time. And it's like when you are more at home with that kind of filtering process, I think it can then open the door to a whole load of connections which would drive you potty if you weren't grounded, and you didn't.
Yeah, that's...
But in a way, that's kind of where it takes you. But you see, all this stuff, you've got to be grounded. Otherwise, just in a fairyland, really.
Right. The key is the grounding. The key is the grounding. The other is that, you know, out of that deep delta dreamless sleep, that's where you sleepwalk. You don't sleepwalk out of dreaming sleep, REM sleep. You sleepwalk out of deep delta stage 4 sleep. That's where sleepwalking comes out of. And when you think about it, that means at some level, the brain is processing. I mean, you got to process. Not that they're so coordinated, believe me, but yeah, that's where it's coming out of.
Fascinating.
Fascinating.
Interesting to me. I'm very interested, even though I'm doing the EEG where we're really focusing on the neuronal brain. I'm much more interested now in the glial cells and the research that's coming out there, because when we talk about connection, it seems that there is a belief that those structures in the glial cells that are also in the rest of our body are communicating through light waves with the rest of the world and each other instantaneously all the time. So while we're still focusing on the neurons, that's a very different part of the brain. And I think that, you know, our excitement will be when we learn more about this.
Connection to the web.
The quantum brain. Yeah, there's an article out on your brain is both a neurocomputer and a quantum computer.
Yep.
And we're still stuck on the neurocomputer.
Yes.
I'm a lot more interested in the quantum computer.
Oh, agreed. Same thing. And that's part of the field. They've just come out in neuroscience with the fact that there's more of an electrical field, so there's a rippling out, and that fits very well with the glial model.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Fascinating stuff.
Right.
I see that we were gone 2 hours and 12 minutes, and I think we could go another 22 hours and 12 minutes.
Well, thank you, Peter. Peter,
Thank
it
you.
was just a wonderful presentation. Really, really enjoyed it. And loved learning about these dots. Biodots.
Go and try them. Change the world. A little more dotty.
That's it.
Thank you.
I was just going to say this was a fantastic webinar, and always a treat to see Blake's brainwaves.
Yes, absolutely.
Blake is such a
Almost unbelievable.
Fantastic. But Peter, your presentation was just amazing, and I am going to be using the biodots. In fact, I'm going to be spending some time with the biodots in the mind mirror to see what can happen there, and perhaps I can take that with me and not be hooked up with the mind mirror. So, you know, just playing around with that. So thank you again.
Obviously, they're pretty broad brush, the biodots, but, you know, broad brush is still feedback.
Yeah.
Easy feedback, too.
Absolutely, yes. Pretty foolproof.
As much as anything can be.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yes. Then you've always fallen off somewhere. I've lost it.
So this was great. Thank you all for being here on this practitioners webinar. Just a little side note is that we're going down from 3 times a month to 2 times a month for the webinars starting next month. And that is because I have finally managed to produce a whole new users series that Oksana has uploaded to the webinar website, 1 through 9, and I'll probably add to them. And it basically is short videos that explain how to use the mind mirror, well, everything, software.
Right.
It's, you know, if you don't want to read the user manual, watch the short videos. And so for that reason, we're not doing the new users webinars anymore. Now it's just going to be self-trainers, which is all practicums, all instruments, software. Everybody bring a session if you want it interpreted, that sort of thing. And then the second one per month is going to be the practitioners webinar. Next month we have, we're looking at the frequencies of music, meditation, and the mind mirror. That's killer webinar. We're going to have some free music for you. I meditated to Marv Jolly's beautiful musical compositions, and we did, Oksana and I did a pre-recorded interview with him, and we're doing a pre-recorded with Joel Mitchell, a former Broadway and opera singer as well, and a musician. But then, since Steve's here, may I also mention that in May, Steve is going to be our seminar host, and he is going to show us about neurofeedback and the mind mirror. We're going to look at all of the wonderful neurofeedback things you can do with the mind mirror, and even ways to adjust the mind mirror display now is in there, so that you can up-train your alpha, down-train your beta, and I don't even know how to use most of this myself. With the new advances that Steve's put in the software, it's all I can do to keep up with the usual stuff. So it's going to be really exciting. Robin's going to do a pre-recorded interview with us on neurofeedback, and also Andrea Groh, because she has incorporated neurofeedback into her Awakened Mind practitioner trainings. So so we're just rocking and rolling with these things. We hope you'll come back, and we're building a wonderful library of knowledge base for mind mirror and neurofeedback people. So thank you for being here. Thank you again, Peter. Wonderful, wonderful job.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Judith, and everyone, and Oksana.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you,
See you
Oksana.
next time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve, for tuning in.